Collecting. Well, if you're on this channel, Spector Creative, to those who haven't read the name of the channel, you're probably a bit of a collector. It's that bug in all of us, right? To acquire stuff and have as many of something as possible, whatever it is. And there's lots of things people collect in this world, from things you find to things you create. Okay, I guess for more or less, you can do that. Well, if you're on this channel, it's probably because the main thing you collect are action figures. And one of the things that I get a lot in the comment section is people asking about the availability of figures, especially based on the past. So in particular, Timothy Miller asked on the comment section why figures used to be so much more available for longer periods of time. What he means is things like in the 80s, where Luke Skywalker, the original Farm Boy one, was re-released for Empire and for Jedi, and you could basically find the same figure for the good part of a decade. Fast forward to today, and the availability of most action figures is a very, very small window. So the question is, why is this? Why is it that the buying window for action figures has shrunk? Well, looking at the way collectors collect and doing so to sort of complete teams, if you will. So maybe you collect Marvel Legends because you like X-Men, or maybe you like Avengers with some X-Men mixed in. Or maybe, like me, you collect Spider-Man villains. That's one of the things that I love to collect with Marvel Legends. Well, it takes years to do this, because most of the figures are out for a very small amount of time, and if you don't buy them within that window, they're gone. And that can be a little disheartening, especially for people coming into the hobby new, who realize to get a complete set of a team, they needed to have been collecting for years, because one character came out a long time ago. It's very different than it was in the 80s, where the same figure would hang on the pegs for years, if not a decade almost. And it would be on the same card, or it would just get an updated package, but it would essentially, you could start your collection at any point. Now, if you're not in from the beginning, you kind of miss out. So if you wanted Frogman, for example, well, if you didn't get him when he hit the pegs in a Legends wave in, 2020, I believe he came out, well, the chance of him getting reissued is probably slim to none. It could happen. Hasbro does reissue some figures, but for the most part, action figure collecting tends to be a limited time offer. And this can be a very frustrating part of the hobby because, as I said, we like to have full teams. This isn't exclusive to action figures. As an example, my daughter recently purchased a Ava Max record, and she had her choice of getting the blue version or the orange version. Both of them were noted as limited edition transparent versions, although it turned out that transparent records don't work that well, and she returned it, and we're now waiting for the unlimited edition to get a plain black record so it will actually play. Yes, my daughter did buy a record. I know, shocker. These things are making a comeback. All right, let's look at a better example. So things that have limited edition versions and regular versions, like we used to get with DVDs a lot. Yes, I know DVDs are a form of media that's quickly going extinct. So when Lord of the Rings Extended Cut came, you could buy the super version with all the little busts and statues, or you could just buy the regular version that was out for a longer period of time. And something like a DVD or just a movie, when it comes to media, yes, media is going to change, Betamax, VHS, Laserdiscs, DVDs, Blu-rays, streaming, but pretty much you're always going to be able to find something like that. Just the format might change. You're not seeing the inventory turnover in things like records and movies that you do in the toy industry. And this is because of the relationship between the movie industry and the toy industry. And while the movie content is usually always available, the toys that are synced to the movie aren't. And let's talk a little bit about that because it's a really interesting factor. So to go into that, to dive in, first we have to look at what are called tentpole movie events. And what I mean by that is this is an expression the movie industry uses for those big summer blockbusters. The movies that come out between usually April and the end of July that are meant to do the bulk of the studio's revenue for that year. And they're heavily advertised. They're advertised everywhere from online to billboards to putting them on licensed product. And that's where toys come from, or come in, shall we say. So toys are, to a movie studio, almost no different from salty snacks or soft goods clothing, if you will, t-shirts. They are just yet another billboard for their movie. Some movies that have very toyetic elements don't get toys. Just because you're making a movie and it has toyetic elements, like a hero and ships and monsters, it doesn't guarantee it's going to get a toy line. There's a lot of factors that go into how movie studios and toy companies work together, and really how toy companies choose which properties to develop into toy lines. There are some movies that do get toy lines, and the toy lines don't work. Sometimes because the movie doesn't work. And there is definitely a relationship between box office success and the success of a product line at retail. I actually worked on the Warcraft line when I was at Jack's and got to kind of experience this firsthand. A lot of work went into the toy line, but unfortunately, unless you were in China, the movie didn't really do too well. Let's look at the opposite example, something like Revenge of the Sith. And I know there's lots of other Star Wars examples that go on other sides of the spectrum, but this one did do well in the box office and did do well in the toy aisle. Hence why I want to use this example specifically and not say, The Last Jedi or something like that. All right, so Revenge of the Sith, the final of the prequel movies. Lots of great toys. So the relationship here is that the toy aisle at retail is not really to sell toys. Just like when you see other displays throughout a store, and almost regardless of the category of what's on it, whether it were DVDs or in this case toys, the reason is, and the shocking truth, if you will, is that the whole point of getting the toy line into mass retail is to act as a billboard for the movie. I mean, yes, obviously the revenue for the toys and the toy company needs this, but the priority for the movie studio is having as much real estate in the big box store as possible and having displays in different areas of the store. So you have your salty snacks display, you have your DVD display, you have your toy display, you have your t-shirt display. Ideally, no matter what aisle a consumer is walking down, they're going to run into a giant oversized display showing, yes, you could think of it as product, in this case, toy product. Well, okay, I know this end cap's a little empty. Let's look at something that's not as empty, these DVDs. But the point is, the industry doesn't always look at these as, we're going to sell a lot of DVDs or we're going to sell a lot of action figures. It's much more, we're going to use the big box store as, think of it like an outdoor billboard. It just happens to be indoors. So the reason that companies want action figures made of their movie is because it increases the presence of the film in a retail store. So the more places, the more departments that a display can be put in, and the more unique those displays are, and the more eye-catching they are, that's the more billboard space that a movie studio gets to advertise their property. And sometimes getting placement at a retailer in multiple departments is more valuable than actually the sales of the product that are on this display, because it's no different than driving down the highway and seeing billboards for a movie. In this case, you're walking down the aisle with your cart and you're seeing billboards for a movie, but the billboard is in the form of product. So the reason that figures get turned over so much more now is because Hollywood is much more on this big tentpole event strategy versus back in the 80s. And everyone is fighting for space. And all of these studios with all of these tentpole movies, everyone wants to have as much product in big box retail as possible. And they want to then switch to the next one very quickly. And the toy aisles aren't that big, especially because we don't have toy stores anymore. So as more and more movies are coming out, every year now the aisle has to switch over to support the next year's set of potential blockbuster tentpole movies. And that is why you don't see the same figures hanging around retail year after year the way it did when we were kids in the 70s and 80s. It's a very different movie market now, and that's the relationship between toys and movie content. The toys are sold at big box retail. Yes, it's great to have revenue from the toys, but it's also really there to promote the movie and act as a living toyetic billboard for that film in as many aisles as possible. I hope this video clarified a little bit about why action figure distribution has changed and why such a limited window these days. If you have any other questions or comments, leave them below, and hey, maybe your comment will wind up being part of a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.